KTRH News Time is 5:47. Joining me right now, former Reagan White House Press Secretary Peter Roussel. Peter, welcome to Houston's Morning News. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks, Matt. Good morning.
Hey, 48 years ago, JFK is buried. It's a time when America and the world stood still. How do you remember that day, Peter?
Well, I think you're right in saying it stood still. It was like a freeze frame for 3 days, as I remember it. I guess, Matt, looking from a press spokesman standpoint, too, what in retrospect, what I think was particularly significant about that moment is that with the American presidency, I think, was going through a transition, and the transition was that for the first time, coverage of an American presidency was not being dominated by print news media, by newspapers, but instead was being dominated for the first time by electronic news media, television. So coverage of the American presidency and all the trauma of the Kennedy assassination and the Kennedy funeral was being brought right into our living rooms in a very vivid way that we hadn't known up to that time.
Now, I understand that when the president was shot, you were actually a college student on the set of a movie with Steve McQueen and Lee Remick. Tell me about that.
That's exactly right, yeah. I was a student at the University of Houston at the time, and on November 22nd, 1963, I was in Wharton, Texas, where they were making a movie called Baby the Rain Must Fall with Steve McQueen and Lee Remick. It was based on a story written by Horton Foote, who was a screenwriter who was from Wharton, Texas. He had just won the Academy Award for the screenplay of To Kill a Mockingbird.
Wow.
And at the very moment of the assassination, somebody came up to me on the set and said, "Hey, did you hear something? Have you heard something about the president being shot in Dallas?" And of course, I hadn't. So I went over. There was a panel. Excuse me. There was a panel truck there on the set, and I went over and turned the keys on and turned the radio on. And shortly after that, Steve McQueen and Lee Remick came over and were listening right behind me there, and I took a picture of them at the time. And you could, like everybody, you could read in their faces the hurt, the pain that everybody was feeling at that moment.
No question. Peter Roussel, former Reagan White House press secretary, joining us talking about the burial of JFK 48 years ago on this date. And Peter, if you'd be kind enough to hang on, when we come back, I want to talk about the moment that I remember from that day, and also talk a little bit about how the press covers presidents today.
Hear about it. Talk about it now with Matt Patrick.
KTRH News Time is 5:52. Peter Roussel, former Reagan White House press secretary, joining us this morning. Peter, I remember 48 years ago, I was a very small boy. JFK was buried on this date then. I remember JFK Jr., 3 years old, saluting his dad as he went by, and just thinking about it brings a tear to my eye.
No, I'm with you. I understand that was a dramatic moment in itself. Yeah, and the image of Jackie and the two brothers walking down Pennsylvania Avenue with the riderless horse. As I recall on the television coverage of that, they just let it play. There was no narration. The picture spoke volumes, and probably one of the more dramatic scenes we've ever seen involving the American presidency.
Peter, let me ask you this question. In today's world, in 2011, it is a 24/7 news cycle. Certainly wasn't that way 48 years ago, and there were many secrets from that presidency that we're finding out now that were not revealed by the media. But is it a good thing, in your opinion, as a former press secretary, or a bad thing that we have the news cycle that we have today?
Well, the biggest change, Matt, is what I mentioned earlier. In my view, we've gone from dominant coverage by the print media to dominance by coverage by the electronic media. And certainly during Kennedy's era, you still had print media as a major force. Little did I realize that later I would work with one of the reporters that was in the Kennedy motorcade in Dallas, and that was Hugh Sidey of Time magazine. Now, he was kind of a giant of journalism, and I look around today and I say, where have the Hugh Sideys of the world gone? But it's different now because it's, as you cited, the AM/PM news cycles are gone, and we have 24-hour news coverage now, basically.
And I don't, again, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. Sometimes you see news organizations looking for ways to kind of become the news or make up the news in certain cases. So I guess the jury's still out on that. And my final question for you, Peter, as a former Reagan White House press secretary, do you still chat at all with Nancy?
No, actually, the last time I have corresponded with her. The last time I actually saw her was at President Reagan's funeral. Just to go back to your other question about the media, one thing that probably hadn't changed today, I bet even Jay Carney and Robert Gibbs and the people who've been President Obama's spokesman do what all of us used to do, which was every day recite the press secretary's prayer. And that goes, "Oh, dear Lord, please help me today to utter words that will be gentle and sweet, words which tomorrow I may have to eat." So that probably hasn't changed.
I would imagine. Peter, I want to thank you for taking the time on this day after Thanksgiving, and a happy Thanksgiving to you and your family a day late. Thanks for joining us this morning.
The same to you, Matt, and keep after them.